Good evening again. I call the June 3rd, 2024 school board meeting to order. It is 9:07 p.m. We are in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Dr. Hoyk.
Excused.
Ms. Willis.
Here.
Dr. Worley.
Here.
Ms. Heimer-Rowland.
Here.
Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Dr. Jessica Banger.
Here. We have quorum and we will begin. We begin with an opportunity for public comment. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and the community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into debate with members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Is there anyone in the room who would like to have public comment? Seeing none. Jamie, is there anyone online?
No, there are no hands raised.
Thank you. We will move on from public comment. Next up is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Seeing none. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
It is recommended that the school board approve the consent agenda, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Willis. Any board comments or questions on the consent agenda? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Dr. Hoyk. Ms. Willis.
Yes.
Dr. Worley.
Yes.
Ms. Heimer-Rowland.
Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Jessica Banger.
Yes. The consent agenda as presented has passed. Next up, 1 is strategic goal 1, academic performance. Action to approve middle school ELA curriculum, resource adoption. The board had a robust presentation and discussion on this item, has had an opportunity to meet with each of the different curriculum teams in meetings, as well as ask lots of questions over the last month. Thank you for rejoining us and staying here this evening. If you'd like to reintroduce yourselves for the community, and if there's any updates from the last time we spoke.
Great. Yes, I'm Jessica Ebert. I'm the Director of Curriculum.
And Nicole Marble, Chief Academic Officer.
And at this time, we really don't have any updates other than we had our materials available for review for the last 2 weeks since joining you on May 13th. Have not received any public comment or question regarding those resources. And so we're bringing our recommendations to you this evening and opening the floor for further dialogue and questions if you may have any, and looking for your approval of those items.
Thank you. Before we do anything, before there's any more questions and comments, may I have a motion on this item?
It is recommended that the school board approve the middle school ELA curriculum, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Worley. Now that we're motioned and seconded, any board questions or comments?
I'd just like to thank the team, for their thoughtfulness in this. It was clearly needed at the middle school level. I think we all were alarmed as board members to see how our standardized testing scores declined so much from elementary to middle school. And while there are probably things to work out and, there needs to be some fidelity with this curriculum, I'm excited that we are, equipping our teachers with the resources that they need to really ramp up literacy in the middle school. So thank you to you and your team.
So, seeing no other comments or questions, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Dr. Hoyk. Ms. Willis.
Yes.
Dr. Worley.
Yes.
Ms. Heimer-Rowland.
Yes.
Mr. Meyer.
Yes.
Dr. Jessica Banger.
Yes. And we have a new ELA middle school curriculum. Next is action to approve elementary science curriculum resource adoption. Dr. Worley.
It is recommended that the school board approve the elementary science curriculum, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any additional information or comments on this item?
I'll just reiterate that, again, these resources have been posted for the last 2 weeks, and actually 2 weeks plus since our May 13th meeting. And again, no questions or comments have been received in regards to the materials. So we welcome your questions and comments as well.
Summer on.
I just want to thank you for being creative and in your solutions for finding a new elementary science curriculum with the time that's allotted for our teachers to teach science. And then finding a curriculum that aligns so well with the ELA and social studies curriculums. I think that was super impressive to me in our one-on-three meeting about a month ago. And so, yeah, kudos to you. I think that's a really prudent way to spend money too. If we can align all these things so our students are continuing learning throughout their day and not sort of working in silos. So I appreciate that, and I'm excited that our teachers won't be going and shopping for their own materials, and they're going to have kits. And actually, I think this is going to be a super engaging curriculum for our students. So thank you.
I just had a quick question. Hopefully you can kind of like sum it up in a nutshell. But, as we've done these audits and we see that STEM is not working in a number of areas and that our community has an appetite for STEM for all, that, we want all students to be exposed to that, especially as things are changing. Can you kind of sum up how this curriculum will align with that kind of STEM for all model and like what the accessibility will be for our elementary school students across all of the schools?
Yeah, I can get us started and then feel free, Dr. Marvel, to join in. So I think I mentioned this at our last board meeting that the science standards have 3 dimensions. They have the cross-cutting concepts, they have the disciplinary core ideas, and they have the science and engineering practices. So when we think about STEM for all, it is about elevating those science and engineering practices within our universal classroom spaces and really living out our science standards. When we think about the S in science, the T the S in STEM, the T in STEM, right? Engineering in STEM. So it kind of makes up the acronym, most of it. And so we know that this is a start, that we have a curriculum that helps elevate these engineering and science practices within our science curriculum, but we know that there's more work to be done. This is a starting point. It's a way to get us going. We need to continue to think strategic and creatively as other opportunities emerge to bring more STEM into our classrooms and spaces. But this is a starting point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig, Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Emerald Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessa Banger.
Yes. Thank you both for your good work and look forward to seeing the fruits of the labor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Strategic Goal 6, Operations, Presentation of the Preliminary 2024-2025 School Year Budget. On this item, no action will be taken this evening. The board will have opportunities to sit with this information and a vote will be at our next board meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Jessa Banger, board members. Mr. Brightman and I will go over this presentation. We actually presented this information to the community last week. It should be on our YouTube channel at this time now if you're curious of in watching it. As you know, a year ago, after we found out that the state budget was going to not meet the inflationary increase over the 2-year period of the 23-24 and 24-25 school years, we came to the board and we said that we had a plan, and the plan was to utilize fund balance for that was our strategic plan. I'm pleased to say that we've been able to maintain and in many cases actually increase staffing where we saw needs. One of the major areas where we increased staffing was at Eisenhower Elementary School. If you remember a year ago this time, there was a lot of concern with that school community. I'm pleased to say that they've had a very successful year. And I think that successful year is correlated directly to the level of staffing we've been able to provide. We were also able to place a lot of different resources in a lot of different schools and serve a lot of our students with IEPs, students who have special education needs through your funding of the 23-24 plan and what we have before you tonight. So I'll jump in and start. One thing that I know for sure about our school system is that everyone cares about the local schools. But there's also a need for us to be fiscally responsible. And I think what we've done with this 2-year plan, and it's a 2-year plan, is that we are taking a fiscal responsible approach to how we fund our schools. As you know, over the next 5 years, we're projecting a 5-year shortfall of approximately $61 million. And you can see that the estimate over the next 4 years, we know that is $9.3 million for sure for the 24-25 school year, but we know that the upcoming years will, in essence, depend on how the state funds public schools. So I know Ms. Willis and Dr. Hoig and I will get to work this summer to start our advocacy now for public education in Wisconsin. But contrary to the belief, our challenge is related to the level of funding that we receive at the state of Wisconsin. So we're hopeful that these anticipated shortfall will lessen and be reduced, but that's all dependent on how the state legislature decides to fund schools. The history of budgeting in Wauwatosa is really clear. We have a historic pride in balancing our budgets and having fiscally prudent budgets. But we also realize that the lack of investment in academics, in student supports, and employee compensation just are not commensurate with what our aspirations are in our strategic plan, nor are they commensurate with what our expectations for our school system is from community members. In short, there's an imbalance that we're dealing with. There's high expectations for our schools. And what you're going to see from Mr. Brightman in a few minutes and a few slides is that we're one of the lowest spending school systems in the metropolitan area. We can't have both. You can't have one of the lowest spending school systems in the metropolitan area, yet we have aspirations that are commensurate with some of the highest spending school systems in the area. And you have this tension of the state legislature has failed to fund public schools at an inflationary increase. There was a lot of conversation around what was our legislative plan and our legislative agenda going into the 23-25 biannual budget. The Wauwatosa School District advocated for a $1,000 per pupil dollar increase over the 2-year period of the 23-24 and 24-25 school years. That's what we were advocating for. It's important to know that that was a conservative legislative agenda, that most school systems in the state of Wisconsin were advocating, and Ms. Willis knows this very well, most school districts were advocating for $1,500 over the 2-year cycle of the state legislative state budget. We advocated for $1,000. We thought that was a more fiscally prudent approach. And it was disappointing to know that the state legislature actually came in at $650 over the 2-year period. So again, most school districts were asking for $1,500 over the 2-year or the 2 school year budgets. We advocated for $1,000. The actual dollar amount came in at $650. Here's the nuance that everyone needs to keep in mind. That $650 over the 2 school year period that the state legislature provided is some of the highest dollars that they've invested in public schools ever. And so you will hear a narrative of the state is investing more money than ever into public schools. And that may be true. And that still does not close the shortfall that they've created by not investing at the inflationary increase since 2009. So while they have made that investment, there is still a great level of need. That's why when Mr. Brightman and I and our district put forth our legislative agenda, we felt that that was a conservative, a very attainable goal to present to our legislators, and it just did not resonate. It didn't resonate. So again, this time a year ago, I shared with the board that we were in a good position. We were in a position better than most school systems, that we had a healthy enough fund balance where we could sustain ourselves for 2 years and fund our schools at the level that we believe our children need the schools funded. We were able to deploy resources where we felt the resources needed to be deployed. And it gave us a good starting point to figure out what's working in our school system and what's not working in our school system. And what we are anticipating is that with the 24-25 school year, we always felt that we were going to end our 2 school year usage of fund balance in a place where the fund balance would end at 17%. So we always knew that a year ago. We knew that was our goal, to end there. Because if you look at the slide here, when we started with the 2021-2022 school year, we were at a little over 50% of our operating budget was in fund balance. And auditors would tell you that was also unhealthy. You should never be at a point where you have that much fund balance. That's an indication that you're not investing in the day-to-day operations of the school system. So we think that we're finally getting to a level of balance with the uses of fund balance for the 23-24 and 24-25 school years. We're actually in the midpoint of budget development for the 2024-2025 school year. The process actually started in December of 2023 as we started looking at our resident and non-resident enrollment projections. We also, and I really want to thank the board, your child-centered decision around open enrollment was healthy for us to know what we're going into. That happened in January. You then you allowed us to start the process of developing a staffing plan. You approved that staffing plan in April. That staffing plan drives nearly 80% of the overall plan that you have in front of you this evening. And so now we're pleased to provide a preliminary budget to you. Ms. Zelazowski last month gave you an overview of our proposed staffing plan for teachers, our proposed staffing plan for support staff, and our district office staff. I know there's been a lot of discussion around the change of district office staffing. And so with this slide, if you click into the hyperlinks, you can get access to all those staffing plans at your convenience. So I'll just leave that slide there. We're proud of the fact that we're seeing a decrease in behavioral referrals. 2 years ago, there was a lot of concern around the behavior in our schools. Our response was that we believed that we needed to resource our schools in a different way to support teachers, but more importantly, to support students. There's a book that talks about the fact that children who do misbehave in schools, they don't want to misbehave in schools. They don't want to be the center of attention among their colleagues and their classmates. They want to be successful in schools too. The way that students who have challenges and needs around behavioral situations, the way that we can help them is if we teach them in those environments how they can navigate their feelings and their emotions so they can make the right decisions. We now have properly funded and resourced our schools in a way where there are people in schools that can help our students who are having those challenges. And I believe wholeheartedly that's the reason why we're seeing such positive resources and results in our behavioral data. We're also taking a systems focused approach to our work. And as a result, we're seeing an increase in academics with ELA, with science. We're seeing an increase in student attendance. We're seeing, again, a decrease in disciplinary referrals. At the core, there is a lot of excitement around what we're doing academically, what we're doing from a systems perspective. That's all a result of our system focused work and resourcing our schools in a proper way. And just one last point here, I just want to emphasize that 2 years ago, we really wanted to hone in on how can we better support our students who are academically struggling. We found a way to use our title dollars to increase our academic specialists from 6 to 12. And we're seeing that that's having an impact on our student performance. However, that's only dealing with the 10%, the bottom 10% of our students who need academic support. This is where we have a tension again of resourcing and making sure that we're getting the right resources to our schools. We still don't have enough support to deal with the bottom 25% of our student population who need academic support. So while we're doing good work, I think this is a symbol of we're doing good work with very limited resources. And the frustrating part for us as educators is that we know if we were fully funded and we were fully resourced, how much better we can make the educational experience for students, which ties into our strategic plan, which one of our core values is to provide an exceptional educational experience for every child. Where we know that we're not doing that right now, mainly because of resources. Just want to spend a few minutes discussing our ESSER 3 funded positions. We realized that coming out of COVID that we had needs from an elementary behavioral specialist perspective. We know that there are young people at our elementary schools who are still learning the process of being in a school setting and how they can be supported in those school settings. We know that we had secondary students who needed mental health support. We know that we needed to bolster what we were providing from a 18 to 21 special education program perspective. We knew that there were blind spots in our academic program. And so we used our ESSER 3 dollars to fund these positions. And I'm pleased to say that as a result of funding these positions, we're seeing better results for kids as a result. I think it is easy to say that we shouldn't have used the ESSER dollars to fund these positions, that by adding more staff, now you just added more costs. And the answer to that is yes, if you are not focusing on the needs of students. If you're focusing on the needs of students, we knew that we had needs with our secondary students with mental health needs. We knew that we had students at our elementary schools who needed assistance with their behavioral needs. We knew that we had needs for providing more transportation for our special education students through passenger vans. We knew that we needed to deal with cell phone locker installation somehow, some way. These are just needs that we knew that we needed to address. And so we utilized our ESSER 3 funds in a way that I believe proactively addressed areas that as educators we felt that we needed to handle. In the area of employee compensation, it's in your budget document. And I want to just pause here for a second and say I'm proud of the work that our team put together in putting out the actual budget document, not only this slide presentation, but the budget document. Often I hear that the terminology of transparency in our community. If you want to know anything about our budget, it's in this document. Over the last 3 years, we've increased teacher compensation by 21%. That is remarkable, in my opinion, and that is good. And yet, our teachers are still in the bottom quartile. Now, we're at the top of the bottom quartile. We're not at the bottom of the bottom quartile, but at least we've made some movement. But even with that extensive investment, we are still dealing with an employee group that isn't compensated at the level that I would like to see them compensated at. I think that is the result of years of us not investing in teachers' compensation. And so it's going to take years for us to dig ourselves out of this situation. We've built this budget on a 4% cost of living increase for all staff. We've increased this budget, understanding that we needed to address the technology department compensation to align with their local comparables. We built this budget addressing comparables for our recreation department employees, and we addressed this budget and built this budget knowing that our associate principals at the secondary levels were not being compensated with their comparables at the regional level. So we built this budget addressing all of those HR needs. One of the challenges that you're going to find is that we know that health benefit costs continue to rise. We've built this budget on a 4% increase of health benefit costs. There's a likelihood that we will come back to the board in August, and that number will be higher than 4%. And so how we can get creative and reducing those benefit costs will be something that Ms. Elizowski and her wellness committee will work on. I'm pleased with the fact that we at least have a wellness committee that will give feedback from an employee standpoint. This slide is really interesting. You'll note that we are the fourth school district, and I know it's really hard to see the graphic, but we're the fourth school district toward the right of when you look at the slide. And it just demonstrates how much or how little, in this case, how little our employees are paying into the cost for health insurance. And I think that's a challenge that we have as a school system. The next few slides just shows staffing by position and FTE. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Brightman to start looking at our enrollment, and I'll let him continue from that point forward.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion with the task force members on looking at current and future projections on enrollments. And so what you're seeing here is actual enrollments projected forward to 24-25 and pretty flat. We're seeing a little bit of a downtick in our junior kindergarten program. That may be typical this time of year. We may see enrollments increase over the summer, but we don't know the yet. So we've adjusted this chart to kind of show where we're at real time with that enrollment piece to that. But long term, we're expecting to see resident enrollment flat to that slightly increasing that was referenced at the previous meeting, which is a good thing on the budget side. And likewise on the staffing side, really enrollments drive staffing and it drives revenue. So it's a key piece that we look at within our budget process. As Dr. Means mentioned, we're looking at a $9.3 million shortfall for next year. Last year that we're going to recommend to use the fund balance to help address the shortfall. We are incorporating $325 per student increase that was part of the current state biennial budget. We layered in the 4% compensation increase for all employees, 4% on the health and dental increase. We did do a modest slight increase to class size to result in 15 FTE reductions across the system. And then that helped us afford to sustain some positions that were added this current fiscal year within that. We're looking at an investment in a near-site clinic. We've talked a little bit to the board previously about doing an on-site clinic, and the capital costs as well as just the ramp-up time for that would be longer duration than it would be to invest in something more like a near-site. So that would be subscribing with a health network using some of their existing office space. So it's a much more turnkey type of operations. Likewise, Champions program was started this year. It's been, excuse me, extremely successful. And so we'd like to continue that program and look at long-term space for that program. We've had increased programming for better support of families and students. And again, we've had that flat to slightly increasing enrollments, which is what you want to see on the resident enrollment side. We're not going to put too many spreadsheets in front of you. We did include, and I think it's the next slide, more in-depth budget book that really shows the board and community really all things budget. And there's other links within that document to get to some other source documents and that kind of thing. But as a high level, and what we're going to ask the board to approve is what you're seeing on this slide. And so it goes through each fund. We have the general fund with expenditures for next year of $99.353 million and revenues of $89.976 million. And so you do the math on that, that's where you get the $9.3 million shortfall. One last year, again, of using fund balance to get to about $17.3 million. That's about 17.3% then as an ending fund balance amount. And that's as far as we are comfortable recommending, again, for a drawdown with that. Fund 11 is where the district has captured federal grants in the past. We're undoing that. We're wrapping that into Fund 10. So you'll see that go away over the next year cycle. Fund 21 is where all the gifts and donations from PTOs and scholarships and that kind of thing go. So we don't do a budget in there. We just have a remaining balance within that. Fund 27 is where we account for all the special education costs across the district. There's a little bullet down at the bottom of this chart that shows 10.5 million approximately of a transfer from Fund 10 to 27. And one of our key requests in the state biennial budget was to increase that reimbursement threshold from a 30% to something closer to 60. That was not realized. They did go up to 33%. So that $10.46 million represents 33% of our expected costs being reimbursed, and the remainder is then the transfer from Fund 10. Fund 38, non-referendum debt. The district does not have any debt in that category. Fund 39 is referendum approved debt. And so that would be the capital referendum from 2018. And this represents the principal and interest payments that we have budgeted for next year. Recall, we didn't have any expenditures budgeted for the current 23-24 school year. We do the every other year debt service payments to help work within the 8 formula and optimize where the district sits within that. But next year we double up on those. For Fund 41, the capital expansion, that's where we do some capital projects. The district has put money aside into that fund dedicated for capital improvements. And so before we move forward with additional projects, we'll bring those projects back to the board and get approval on those, as well as the bids for those projects. Fund 49 is where we captured all of the referendum spend. So we issued the bonds. When it gets put into Fund 49, we spend it on the projects. And then Fund 39 is where we levy for the principal and interest payments on that. But capital improvement for Fund 49, fully spent on the referendum. So you'll see no expenditures or revenues in that fund. Fund 50 is the food service fund, and it's designed to operate like a proprietary fund or a business entity within the district. And so we expect this fund to at least break even. And so we'll talk about that as the next agenda item and part of that logic in getting to a vendor selection. But looking at $2.2 million in revenues and about $2.7 million in expenditures, we are being forced, I guess is the right word, by DPI to spend down some of the fund balance in Fund 50. Those funds were accrued during the COVID years when all students received free lunch, and we built up a balance as did most districts, and now we need to spend that down on capital investments. So a big ticket item that we're doing is the Whitman freezer. That is the central freezer for the entire district. And so replacing that with a modern freezer structure that'll serve the district in the future. So that's just a good use of those funds along with other equipment.
Are we only
updates.
able to spend it on capital improvements?
It's very restricted as to, so it's technically federal funds that we receive to spend on items. So we have to be careful that it's food service related. And it can be things like lunch tables, it can be dishwashing machines, but it should be capital investments in the program.
So it couldn't be to alleviate debt that maybe some students have accrued for purchasing food.
We did check with DPI on that. We cannot use Fund 50 for that purpose. That has to come out of Fund 10, unfortunately.
Thank you.
And then the last fund is Fund 80, and that's community service. And that's most of that is the rec program that we offer within the district. We're one of 18 districts in the state that has the rec program as part of the school district rather than the municipality within that. So $2.8 million on both sides of the equation for that one. So a total revenue of $126.2 million and total expenditures of $145.6 million over all funds within the system. Within that. Any questions on that piece? This is what we're going to ask the board to recommend for approval at the next meeting.
I have one. Is the freezer something that can be used somewhere else? Should the district at some point decide to reallocate space at Whitman for something else?
Yeah, so we are designing it. We modified our design slightly. We're going to put it into an existing storage room rather than replace the existing freezer that's there. Number one, that saves dollars in any kind of remediation and construction costs because we're adding something, not just doing the demolition side. There's no hazardous substance removal, that kind of thing within the plan that we have. And all the condensers and the inner workings of that freezer can be moved to another site. Yes, so we took that into account if that were to be the case.
Mr. Meyer.
I have an IT question. Is this the right time you're on the main slide there, so I just want to, is it okay to say it now? Okay, I just want to comment to urge that we be sure we at least adequately fund IT security. That's like, we know, we hear it, we read in the papers, the healthcare networks, multi-state networks shut down. We don't, obviously, we have a very capable IT lead. Please give him what he asks for.
Yes. Yeah, we do. You've heard a lot about, I think, Ascension Healthcare recently.
Yes, I don't want to name names, but
Right.
Jamie will keep us
But
as
even
safe
some
as
top level
possible.
entities are, have flaws in their security because the people looking for those flaws are.
Right. Oh,
one step ahead.
I understand, but I also, he needs to, I'm sure he is, but I want to emphasize that he needs to be resourced, as he's a very responsible person about asking for things. And I just want to be sure that down in the nuts and bolts and the weeds of this budget, that he has what he tells you he needs. And I'm sure you give it to him, but I just want to voice support for it.
Mr. Meyer, this is Jamie, Director of Technology. I appreciate the advocacy, and that's great. That's awesome. Thank you very much. But also be aware that there are grants that are just coming to fruition, cybersecurity grants, and cybersecurity has also been worked into E-rate as well. So we should have quite a bit of state and federal funding available to us to take advantage of from that regard. But
I mean,
please advocate away. I love it.
Well, we could be a little bit less here and there back before this internet hacker era. But now there's no forgiveness from those folks once they come after you. So thank you, Jamie. Thank you.
So it looks like the difference between the budget and expenditures is like $19 million. I thought we were on a $9.3 million.
Yeah, the Fund 10 is where you get the $9.3 million shortfall amount if you subtract just that line item. And the reason it's thrown off on the bottom line too is when you look at the non-referendum debt, we're doubling up our debt payments. And so it's kind of artificially propped up one year and then we spend it down the next year, but that's part of our plan ongoing with the debt service.
Oh, and then I just had another question. Do you have any idea what other local school districts have in their fund balance? What percentage of their?
It varies anywhere from lower single digits up to there are districts that were close to the 50%, but have spent that down also. I'm going to say that we're going to be pretty much in the average range when we get to the 17% range.
Is that also, I know we have the unique component of being a self-funded healthcare. So with that in mind, are we also within the average of districts who are self-funded for healthcare?
I would say yes. Yeah. Most districts, most suburban districts in this area are self-funded because it does provide control of the plan as well as some financial benefits to the district.
Thank you. Are we on 26? So one of the questions I had in the proposed 24-25 budget is the summary on page 26 of the budget booklet. There's a note and there's a kind of it articulates, I think it's for general, does not include board authorized 1.62,724,000 staffing cost approved as an additional use of fund balance in 23-24. That's last year's budget. And
Yes.
this is not this year. Any changes are included in the full budget.
That is correct.
Presented.
Yes. Yep.
So we've reconciled it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in the budget book, so page 32 to 44 is the financial items that you're used to seeing, but I like the way that's wrapped in the budget book with a little more context and description to it. So just a couple of charts to go through, and it's things that most of you have seen before. But when we look at our general fund revenue, the two main pieces of revenue that we have are property taxes and state aid. And so that would be the 55% in blue and the gray section and 30% in state aids. And so when you look at the 12% for open enrollment and 3% from everything else, federal revenues and all the other things that fit into the equation. So really we're dependent on that revenue limit per student, which then gets divided into property taxes and that state aid amount as we look forward. As you know, Wauwatosa is a property wealthy suburban district. And so it doesn't fit as well in the aid formulas as some other districts across the state, but that's the whole intent of the formula, is to equalize out the tax rate impact across the state. On the expense side, again, just for the general fund, we're looking at 50% being on salaries, 14% on benefits. I'm sorry. 21% on benefits. And then the 10% you see in the green slice, that is our transfer to Fund 27. And most of that is also salaries and benefits. So effectively 80% of our budget goes towards salaries and benefits. The remaining portions that we have are areas that we've really compressed, as have most districts across the last decade, if not longer. And so there's really not much more room to go. That's our liability insurance coverage. It's our keeping the lights on, natural gas bills, all those kinds of things that we do what we can to be more efficient. We've gotten to a point where it's really the staffing side that we have to look at if we choose to go the reduction route on the cost side in the future. But for next year, this is how it all shapes out for next year's budget. Focusing on the tax levy itself, so a total 62.013 million is the total levy recommended for next year. 11.2 billion of that is the referendum approved debt service, so that's that Fund 39 principal and interest payment that will be due. 1.4 million goes to the community service tax levy, and that funds the administrative side of the REC program. A small amount for tax chargebacks. That's something that we have every year where there are delinquent taxes and that gets reassessed or re-added to a future revenue limit year and the levy for a subsequent year. And then the large amount, the 49,356,033, that's the revenue limit tax levy that we saw the blue section of that piece of pie on the revenue chart that we looked at. So adding it all together, 62.013 million is the levy for next year. Give some questions. What happens if, how does the tax rate interact with the recommendation? And so that's taking the total levy, dividing it into what we expect to have as total valuation of property across the district. So we're estimating a 2.5 increase in property valuations from what we knew this last fall to what we expect to see this coming fall. And so if it's 2.5%, we would be at 9.284 billion of valuation, which gets us to a 668 or a flat tax rate from last year to next year. If that were to be slightly lower, then that tax rate would be slightly higher. If the increase, which I expect it probably will be higher than 2.5%, that would mean that the tax rate would actually go down from what we're recommending or putting in the preliminary budget. We won't know that information until that's part of what the DPI and Wisconsin Department of Revenue released in October. Until then, we're estimating that variable, that piece of the equation. Any questions on that?
I kind of have a general question just about looking at, the relationship with our rec department. Is there a financial, because we're in Ohio, it's not, I don't think it's common that school districts oversee the rec department. Like, is there a financial benefit in that relationship? Because what I'm accustomed to is, the cities overseeing that department, but is there a financial benefit as a part of that relationship, or is that too complex of a question for an answer?
I'll let you start.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's a financial benefit. There's some synergy that we have by having the rec program as part of our system. And even in most cities that carry the program, the cost of the program is the schools that get utilized. And so we have more control and more, I think, partnership with them being in-house than you would expect to have otherwise within that. We're one of 18 districts, I believe it is, in the state out of 421 that have it in-house with the district. So it's still an anomaly here, I guess, in Wisconsin also, but I just see the synergy with it.
And I'm smiling because ironically, my entire career in Wisconsin, I've been in a district with a rec department. So it's odd, right? And so the benefit is the programming that we're able to provide to families and to children as a result of being in charge of the rec department. But no, we don't benefit from it financially. Anytime there's use of our facilities, we're charging it back to the rec department. There's charges that are going back and forth. I think we try to do a really good job from an auditing standpoint to keep separation between what we do with Fund 10 and what we do with Fund 80. So I think the benefit is the services that we're able to provide to families and students.
Sure.
If we want to have, if the rec department decides it's beneficial to the community to have an after-school recreation program, we don't have to ask anyone, we can decide. And it does have to be community beneficial, but it's very quick for us to be able to make that decision. And I believe a lot of that is equitable in nature. You have preschool rec programs or after-school rec programs or, something like that. There's a lot of latitude in what we can offer for rec department programs. And we're in charge. So there's things we can do.
But we use an outside vendor for after school, don't we?
We can, yes.
But we could, and I have floated the concept of,
Yeah.
So is there like a cost savings in that or?
there could be for our families, right? I mean, so you're raising a really interesting point. Yes.
I guess, so my bigger question is like, is there a way to utilize that relationship that is financially beneficial to our families?
Yes,
to the
there is.
community, to the district?
Depending on how, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, how aggressive we want to become, we have the capability, to Mr. Meyer's standpoint, or to his point that he shared, since we have the flexibility with the rec department, we could venture off into other opportunities and programming.
Thank you.
I'd like, if I may, just add one benefit also is our great partnership we have within our special ed leadership and as well as our special ed staff with rec is to help make the programs in rec more accessible with highly qualified staff as well. So it's another great benefit having them in-house.
Sure, and even toes and paths, right? I mean, I can think of lots of reasons, but I just wonder if there's a way to leverage that relationship since we're only one of 18 districts and not a lot of other states utilize this kind of partnership.
We could become more aggressive, for sure.
So the rec department does provide significant services for seniors as well.
Right.
So it's a community-wide program. But I'll still go back to that if there is like a child directed rec program, we design it. I mean, it can be what we design it to be. And that's pretty powerful, I think, that we have a lot of expertise about children. And so we can share that with the rec department to do, for them to do what's more intelligently, in a savvy way beneficial for the kids.
Our summer wraparound care is a very popular, so popular that it sells out in 3 minutes, 30 seconds.
This year
But-
it sold out in 20 seconds.
Yes. Yes, but I was going to say, in addition to that, though, when I was trying to reach out to some folks in communities about the JK and K enrollment, some feedback came that there wasn't reliable or, I don't want to say negative about the vendor that we have. I actually have a child who's at the elementary school level, but in that it's gone okay most years. But that was definitely a hesitation about enrolling in a part-day program is the lack of care that the prospective parents feel good about. So I do think it's worth research as we go forward to find out if there's a synergy there that could benefit our enrollment as well.
Yeah.
Of course. Kind of piggybacking off what Jessica and Mr. Meyer were talking about there, is there a reason that we haven't pursued more aggressively a public-private partnership? We've got, obviously we got Beyond Medical College, you got Aurora, you've got OAW, you've got all these things that partner with these other facilities, other programs in different parts of the metro to be able to scale that. When we talk about 3K, the TOSA TOTS, the 4K, the other programs and things, we have facilities. We talk about these things, and as we've heard tonight and at other times, to save costs, we can turn out lights and do different things. But why don't we utilize those spaces and times where we can say, we're talking about, Mr. Meyer talks about a lot, the enrollment aspect, getting students in. What better way to get them in than full-time, 4K, more of it in more places, or more access to Toast Tots. And to Lynn's point, part-time wraparound. You talk about some of the other programs there where it's, I find it less equitable because if you have a life of any sort, you can't make it in 20 seconds. Right. And you've already heard in the grocery store the day before of who's going to be on there waiting and in line and online. And, most of the community, I look at just verbal surveys, the amount of people that just say, I'm not going to, and we spend our dollars outside. I'm one of them, but I have used the, right at school and our other things. We used pre-COVID Toast Tots. Did it meet our needs? Somewhat, but there are other programs out there that fully met our needs. And I think that's one of those things where do you people have partial experience and give them a reason to go someplace else, or do we really dig in and say, what is the strategy? If it's 2 point on the previous slide, however much that was, how do we get that 5X and really have something that benefits the seniors, benefits the students, benefits those who really need it, but is treated less like a community rec program or an extension of a church program, a church rec program, and some basis there where it's like a business, but still part of the school system.
It's pretty easy to maximize interagency cooperation when we're both agencies.
Yeah.
I mean, we can really design things smart for both ends of it.
One of the things I'm hearing from my colleagues, and I want us to contemplate this and possibly come back to it, is interest in one area of possible interest as we move forward is investing in early childhood supports or wraparound care. As with all things, one of the things that's difficult with K-4 in Wisconsin is we are not funded for a full day. And so there may be out-of-pocket costs to families. I think there's really interesting models to look at and consider for this. It is for all of us who've navigated childcare in the moment that is 2024 in the last 2 decades, this is a complicated endeavor. And it's only going to get more complicated as more and more childcare areas are struggling financially to figure out how to, it's not a money-making venture for a lot of folks. So I think it makes sense to investigate it. And we'll have to be really focused on, as a board, where do we ask our staff to put time, energy, and resources that will maximize ability to be able to pay for things and do things well going forward. If we're okay with that, I'd like us to move.
I was saying to that point, though, it's not all 4K, because what we have, Eric, is people who are paying for an entire 4K experience because they don't feel comfortable with the partial. We can really pinpoint that as a starting place.
Mhm.
It's not as much research.
I'm excited about the points that you're bringing up and would like to continue the conversation.
I want to go back to the mill rate, because one of the things that is, I think, incredibly complicated for a taxpayer to understand is kind of where are we at with the school funding thing? What does this all cost? One of the exercises I did at home earlier this year is I took a look at the taxes on my home and what's going out of our family checking account, savings account to the school district over the last decade. And then I played with the CPI kind of cost to figure out, okay, what if you held money constant from the current year going back 10 years, because the city of Wauwatosa keeps 10 years of taxes. So it's pretty easy to review on your property, the property that you're currently living in. And I was surprised at what I found for my home. And lots of things have happened in between. There's been a referendum. There's been citywide reassessments. So everyone's in a different situation. A couple of things I know about my home. One, it's just about doubled in how much it's worth since I bought it in 2011. At some point, that will be cool. Two, my taxes, when held constant for inflation, are about what they were in 2011. And over the last 4 years, they haven't really gone up at all. And so it's been interesting to me that where the state has focused resources is really on keeping our property taxes low in lieu of funding schools to a higher level. So good news is taxpayer, I haven't paid much more out for schools at all. Negative, schools have major financial issues. So I would want to encourage everybody to take a look at your specific unique taxes. And I think folks will be surprised when they really look at the numbers of what they may mean. We're all going to be different because we're all in kind of like reassessments and everything will have an impact. But I thought it was an interesting thing. And I've encouraged people to do that when I've talked to them and then reach out to me and let me know kind of what, and I haven't had anybody follow up with me, but yeah, but I hope the community does that.
I can follow up. My taxes haven't changed. I've only just started paying taxes.
Thank you, Ally.
You're welcome.
Yeah, just follow up on that. So the tax rate for next year, 668, the same as it was for this last fall. Just want to note for the board that we've done a couple of kind of conservative planning pieces to this. So as you look at the general fund tax levy of the 49,356,000, that's actually about $1 million on the conservative side. And not to bring up MPS pain because that's happening, I know, real time. But a year ago, if you recall, last October, there was about a $500,000 reduction to the state aid for Wauwatosa. And that was directly attributable towards an MPS restatement of things. So we built some of that into next year's budget, knowing that there's still some things out there. Further complicating things is ESSER 3. We talked about that in our own use, but the statewide impact of that is in the billions of dollars. And so again, that's going to have some interesting aspects to the state aid formula. So we try to be a little bit conservative. The debt service fund is also levying, with the way it's shown here, about 880,000 more than what is needed for that immediate payment. And that's okay. We can reserve those dollars for future payments, future debt service. Earn interest on those dollars, or in October, when we know the actual tax levies and state aids, the board can choose to reduce that down and make things look even better than they do here. So it just provides some flexibility to the district for this October when we realize all these unknowns become knowns at that time. But again, a flat 668 last year to this year, which represents a $2,338 school tax portion of your tax bill if you have a $350,000 home in the district. So this slide resonated really well with our PTA and community groups that we've spoken to over the last several months. And it really boils down to the complications of school finance, but it isn't really complicated when we start talking about what are the options. We can either reduce costs or we can increase revenues. And if we're going to increase revenue, the only real way to do that is through an operating referendum. That is the local control that we've talked about a little bit earlier tonight. On the expense reduction side, we've also talked about how we fit, and I'll show a slide, I believe, in that, how we fit in the expenditure comparisons. And so that's difficult to do, especially decades into current revenue limits and not being funded, aligning with CPI. But also where we benchmark within our peer districts in the area. So that becomes difficult to have a sustained district within that level of expenditure reductions. But this slide, again, really did resonate well with the community groups that we've talked to over the last couple of months. The revenue limits are the key funding formula for schools all across the state. So every district in the state has this revenue limit as their funding formula. As was referenced earlier, back in 1993, this went into place. The blue bars you see on the left side of that chart is when the per pupil increases on the revenue side aligned to inflation or CPI, which is the orange line. And so that was the way the formula was designed, developed, and rolled out and implemented for over a decade of time. The Great Recession happened in 2009. State revenues couldn't keep pace with that, so all state agencies were reduced. Then you see a big drop when Act 10 came into play and effectively did away with collective bargaining and gave local districts a lot more control over the cost side of the equation. And our understanding at that point is that was labeled as a reset to school funding. But from then on, we'd go back to that blue bar matching the inflationary increases. And that just has never happened since. There's never been a year where CPI is equal to what the per pupil increases are. In fact, there's 3 years in recent years where there was $0 increase per student. And so that just compounds a problem over time by not keeping pace with the cost side of what happens. As we do benchmark our revenue limit dollar amount per student with other area districts, we referenced Elmbrook earlier at 12,352 and Wauwatosa at 11,019. That's the current year 23-24 number, the actual number. And the only reason that Elmbrook has that $1,300 more than Wauwatosa is that's where they locked in back in 1993. And so effectively that's given Elmbrook 7.3 million of additional revenue every year since, just based on where they locked in, and no other variable to that. But you can kind of see a comparison of other area districts and where they are currently within that. Shorewood actually is up closer to 15,000 now. They had an operating referendum that really bumped up their per student amount. So there is local control within that, and there's also good benchmarking within that to understand how we fit in within the others.
Mr. Brightman, can you repeat the Shorewood comment?
Yeah, so what's not shown in this chart is Shorewood has approved, I believe for the second time, an operating referendum non-recurring, and it's pretty significant, and their amount's closer to 15,000 per student currently.
So can you go back to the one slide, Mr. Brightman, where it's the scales?
Yes.
And this will be my last comment, because Mr. Brightman and I have spent a lot of time together between December and now, going to every place that will have us. There are certain community members who will say, we'll simply reduce your expenditures. Okay, we can reduce expenditures. It will mean that the educational experience for children will not be the same. It will mean that we can't retain high quality staff members. It will mean that the exact scenario that the board asked me to try to address and fix 3 years ago, we will end up and land back where we were when I arrived. But that's an option. And I think what the community needs to come to grips with is that it's okay for certain members of our community to have that philosophical perspective and just have an open conversation on maybe philosophically we disagree with one another. But I think there's this belief that Mr. Brightman and I, our administrative team, and candidly the board, we don't understand how to reduce budgets. I know how to reduce a budget. You can make tough decisions if we have to. I think the tougher decision that you're making is, but we have to find other ways to generate revenue to preserve the educational experience for children. That's also a tough decision. And I think that's the philosophical conversation that I hope the community will continue to lean in on. There's no wrong answer or right answer. And I respect everyone's perspective, but I think that's where we're landing right now. That there are people who are passionate on both sides of this scale, if you will, who will say, well, you should just reduce your budget, and kids are resilient, they'll overcome. And other staff members will come and work here. That's not true. We were seeing the evidence of children not having good educational experiences. We were seeing that we were unable to hire staff members. We were seeing declines in our academic performance. That's what's at risk when we're having these conversations about the budget. Thank you, Mr. Brightman.
Okay, and then special education funding, just looking back historically, back in the early 80s, there was close to a 70%, 65% reimbursement rate from the state for special education costs, but those costs were much lower. And as costs have exponentially increased since that time, the reimbursement rate has gone down. So that becomes a bigger financial strain on the general operations of the district. So as you recall, part of our legislative request was to go back to something in that 60% range of a reimbursement at the state level. If that had been met, it would be about $3.8 million of additional funding for the system, which would about divide our shortfall in half based on that. So this is significant, and these costs will continue to increase and outpace the rest of the district into the future. So part of the problem that we've discussed and looking and working with the state legislature this last couple of years is the state has the money. None of us knew coming out of COVID what the economy was going to look like. State coffers are actually more healthy than they've ever been coming out of that. And the state reserves right now currently are $3.7 million for their current fiscal year, 23-24, and estimated to be $3.15 billion for the next fiscal year. So a total of just under $8 billion of surplus dollars at the state level. So we had asked them to reappropriate some of those dollars back to schools, and some of it did, but it didn't go as far as we had requested within our platform that we discussed earlier. So again, just looking at the state, all 421 districts in the state are in the same funding formulas. And again, that $6.8 billion surplus piece that the state continues to carry over the 2 years. This comparison shows 21-22 data, and just checked again last week, and this is the most recent data we can get. That's audited DPI comparative data. And the reason that that's important is then we can look at other districts in the same context as our own data. So as we start to piecemeal more recent data, we can't get this level of comparison to it because it's not publicly available at this level. But as you can see in 21-22, while it's also ranked absolutely last in the total per student spending of all the K-12 districts in the Milwaukee area. And so that's just something to also consider when talking about reducing that cost side of the equation. Do we want to go back to being in this level of the cost structures as we look forward? Or do we need to be somewhere higher than we're seeing here to keep pace with the expectations of the community? So that's going to be the big decision coming ahead. So getting back to the options, the first one is we can increase revenue through an operating referendum. The second one, we can go towards reducing expenditures, or option 3 is you do a combination of the two. Again, as Dr. Means said, whatever the charge is given to administration, we will bring recommendations to the board to help satisfy what the direction is between 1, 2, and 3 that you see on this slide. But that's really as simple as it gets as far as what the options are for the board and community to consider. Again, our upcoming dates, looking at tonight, next week, we're going to ask the board to vote on a preliminary budget. It's preliminary because we don't know yet what our actual aid will be in October, as well as the tax levy. So until we know those, it's always a preliminary budget until we get to that point in time. So we'll bring the budget back to the board for the budget adoption, tax levy certification, and that kind of thing in October. We thank you. This is the same slide deck that we used last week with our budget meeting that we had with the community. Wasn't as well attended as some of our other recent meetings, but I think that's because we've been out discussing with many community groups over the last several months to kind of lead into this. So obviously happy to take any questions the board has on this.
I want to get us kicked off. How much do we have budgeted for next year for curriculum adoptions or curriculum updates?
I'll have to look up the actual amounts. So this year we were much more healthy on the budget side because of ESSER 3 funding. I want to say 700,000-ish, which is far too low for a system of this size.
Other questions or comments from the board? So as a board, we will have, and I know the presentation was shared that you gave to the community. It's been available for a bit. The board will have opportunity certainly during one-on-one meetings. The finance committee has had conversations about the budget. We've got a week to an additional week to dig in, and then next week we'll be coming back and having our final vote on this item. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Brightman. Thank you. We then turn to food service request for proposal regarding food service presentation.
Yeah, the district is obviously a participant in the National School Lunch Program, which is mandated by the Department of Agriculture, I believe it is. And so there's a very formal process and rubric that is used to both request proposals from potential vendors as well as to score those rubrics. And we're given a weighted matrix that we use to score those things. And so we had 5 vendors give us proposals. We asked for, I believe, 16, and we got 5 back. Of actual proposals that met the qualifications. We went through the scoring within our team and looked at the weighted scale. The highest weight was given towards financial summaries given by each vendor. And that was kind of an issue that we brought up with DPI, that it's not really a fair way to look at the proposals, because they could pitch whatever they thought would be a more pleasing financial analysis to us. What we found more important was the financial guarantee that they would have for us. And so what we had to use the scoring weight of the highest points towards that financial summary. We also put much more credence in our own vision of this into that guarantee. And so the only vendor to give us a true guarantee was the vendor that we selected. All the other scoring came in very close. We had some of our student reps on the food tastings. We did have some side commentaries and analysis done on both our current vendor as well as some of the other vendors that we had food tastings with and others. And I think based on that, menu selection, food quality, all came out to be very even. So our current provider, Sodexo, is the one that gave us the guarantee at our past contract and continued that with the future contract. And given the financial strain on our general operations general fund, we didn't think it was appropriate to put potential additional strain in the future on the general fund, with all other things being very similar or almost equal within that. All providers are getting much more creative with the food offerings they have. It's getting more difficult because the salt and calorie and sugar content of the weekly allowance that they have currently will be even more restrictive in future years. And so it's going to be even tougher for all vendors to make the food as appealing as what students are used to out of school and that kind of thing. So they're all being creative with using additional spices that are more healthy and flavorful and that kind of thing within what they do. As part of our recommendation, the recommendation is to stay with Sodexo. They did come out with the highest score and the highest rubric. Once we do that part, we send that back to DPI and their school nutrition team, make sure that we did everything properly within our framework and agrees with our findings and our recommendation. So with that, we do recommend Sodexo continue for the next 5-year contract. We are required to go back out to bid every 5 years. And so that's just something that the community should expect as part of a process moving forward.
And what was the commitment of Sodexo understanding? So I understand the financial guarantee that they provided, but what was the one caveat that I've asked Sodexo to commit to moving forward?
Yeah, so we are going to re-energize the wellness committee. We actually have a policy with that, which we have not been enforcing. But we're going to start a wellness committee and a committee with students and parent reps to engage more closely and directly with whoever the vendor is and make sure that they're improving what their operations are. And that's not a cut on Sodexo. It's just we're coming out of the COVID years where food supplies were short. Pricing was just intriguing. Staffing's been difficult, but we're coming out of that in a place where things are much more stable in all those fronts. And so it's time to lean into Sodexo as the vendor and make sure that they're providing the service that we expect and the food quality and the participation that we expect of that vendor.
And, I understand and appreciate that we are in a financial position that doesn't give us the flexibility I think that we could have with food offerings. Attending the WSD convention the last few years, there's a lot of creative, healthy offerings from lots of different vendors. And I appreciate that we don't necessarily have the position right now to utilize one of those, but
well, I think we do now. It's been the last couple of years with supply chain and things, but now things are kind of that ship is being.
Sure. But I mean, even like, I appreciate that Sodexo is offering us that guarantee of profitability, and that maybe other vendors that could offer healthier options, that's just not in a position that we're in, I think, as a district to consider some of those more creative and healthy, lesser known vendors.
Yes.
But I appreciate that you're going to have the wellness panel, because as a parent of students at two different, elementary and middle school, the offerings aren't great. I mean, I think Allie commented earlier about her feelings towards Sodexo, and just if parents knew that they could send their kids to school and get healthy, adequate offerings, I think would help in a lot of ways. But I appreciate that Sodexo is going to receive input from our family and students, because I think they need that. And, in 5 years, hopefully we're in a different financial position where we can offer healthier and more creative food offerings to our students. So And the report, I don't know, 262 pages that Sodexo sent out. Maybe next time they can send in a abbreviated version of whatever their RFP is, because I just
They
couldn't.
were all that extensive, so.
Okay, yeah,
I
maybe. I
tried
don't
to open it and then my laptop was like, file too large to open.
Too large to check it for viruses too.
I actually can't.
It was wild. It was 260 pages, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
But thank you for the work around that, Keith. I know it's, I appreciate that we're in our financial position that we have that guarantee of profitability.
Could I mention, I totally agree. And I think one of the reasons that a company like this can make this kind of offer is because of the economic advantage they already have. So this is in systems thinking, it is success to the successful. It's going to rotate itself all the way through. And so I would really, it's a tough situation to be in. And I think we need to really contemplate, maybe not, and I don't know whether this can be talked about at this point in the contract or not, maybe not just the guarantee of the money, but I'm glad for the wellness. I'm thinking we have this larger system in this district of food. Food isn't just in the cafeterias, and I know they've worked some with the culinary. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. There's some schools that don't have gardens, but would like them. There's some other things that if we're going to go with this larger corporate entity because it gives us a sense of financial security, I'd want to make sure it's not just the financial security. So what else are they doing? Can we leverage? Because if they're doing it in other schools, what else can we leverage that fits with some of our goals? Because otherwise it just reinforces again, the power of a single provider to a region. And, I was a volunteer with Growing Power in Will Allen, and he was deeply connected actually with Sodexo. So there are some pieces there that I think we could build on. So it's not maybe as much a sense of frustration, but I would like to see that. How would they bring, support, maybe some smaller vendors or entrepreneurship within our own schools, or this interest in gardening and composting and other things that various schools are putting forth. They don't all want the same thing, but they want these pieces of their food system to be different within the school. So in the time that we have, or as we're talking to them, I would really like us to put something like that forward. Not just the financial security, that's important, but this other way of really integrating into our schools in a different way.
Piggyback off of what Lynn's speaking up there, said it, Will Allen and Growing Power was a great program. And there's another one here locally that Mike Postad and a couple of younger guys through with Teens Grow Greens.
Yeah.
I said that are constantly looking for ways to tie into the big machine, but at a local level. And everything they do is Greater Milwaukee. And
Teens Grow Greens is great. Yeah.
it's their expansion is tremendous. I mean, and it is Patrick Lubar is now part of that. And there's a lot of local people that want to see that translate into more than just this one thing. I think these are these opportunities where you say, hey, you put Sodexo's feet to the fire, you really want to have this relationship that could go 1 year, 5 years, who knows how far, because you're this big machine. What else can we do that lends to a greater footprint with you that assists not only the systems that we've built, but also the greater community that we're trying to be a part of that is already existing here.
So just to piggyback real quickly on that, Century City hydroponics worked 100 guards. So there's a farm in there that's hydroponics. I mean, there's another program that's operating in Milwaukee. Well, there's a lot of them out there. There's another one that is about connecting STEM engineering with hydroponics. There is some really great stuff happening in the county that we could be part of if we had a way of providing food in our schools that connects more to our curriculum and to local sources. So maybe it's pie in the sky, but I just feel like they have connected in the past with some of these locally run pieces. So where we can push that and ask for that, I think
These are great ideas, and yes, we want to strengthen the relationship between our families, our students, and Sodexo. I love these ideas and we'll make sure that there's follow-up.
Question I have on this is, can our contract carve out opportunities for students if they so chose to create a cafe or something else within the schools where that would be a student run, student operated? I could imagine we're getting a lot of updates right now from our student culinary program. So the student culinary program said, you know what, we're going to create an option. Is that something we could do? Is that something that we could look at in the contract either now or 2 years from now or something? But I would love for there to be an opportunity for students to have learning experiences. This seems to be an area that's picking up right now. And for an opportunity for student run learning opportunity that's providing an additional service that we aren't currently providing and Sodexo can't provide would possibly be a really interesting thing to consider as well.
Yeah, I know Sodexo and all the vendors are interested in doing those partnerships within our instructional programs and having students involved and learning that craft. So, Allie.
Just peeking on their website, I see that they do have something for younger students, like elementary level. It's called Future Chefs, but not so much for middle or high school.
Mr. Martis, the hand.
Yeah, couple things. Is it my time? Okay. I really like the idea of growing things, except you're going to have to learn how to fight rabbits and white-tailed deer. And I speak from experience. So, and I'm serious about that. I mean, there's all kinds of science opportunities about greenhouses, and I see, like, I drive home to La Crosse, and there's a greenhouse on the south side of Bangor High School. And so there's a lot of things we could do. I suspect is making it part of the formal lunch food program because the nutritional content is highly regulated by the federal government. In order to qualify for the funding, that it would help us to partner with a vendor like you're suggesting. Sort of side activities, I'm all for it. It's for a $3 tomato plant, you can get a lot of tomatoes in August, as tomato growers know, and the deer and the rabbits don't eat them. So, I mean, I'm all for a lot of this stuff. Another theme here is that to try to put this in context about the budget, that we don't think about it now tonight, but not so many years ago, all of our food service people were employees. And we, for budgeting purposes, started to contract with Sodexo. And those were very emotionally difficult evenings for the board to deal with those transitions from employees to an outside vendor. Similarly to when we transitioned to an outside vendor for our custodial services, some of our other services. That was an evening where physical threats were made to board members from people. I mean, real threats, not where somebody stood up in their chair to get ready for something. And at least on the board side of the table. So, but we did those things, and it seems kind of normal now, and we don't even realize the struggles it took. And so that's probably informs us now we're going to have some struggles coming up over the next few months or a couple of years about what to do. And we will get through it, and it will seem hard and difficult, and we can't become insensitive and cold. But as what's said tonight, sometimes things have to change. Now, another caution, if we go to sell things and raise money, it's a little off topic, but I'll go there. Please grant me leave. Someone came to us, I don't know, 10 years ago, and there was a heartfelt appeal for us to sell some of the Longfellow property for funeral plots for the cemetery. And they wanted it at a cheap price to sell land to the cemetery because they needed places for the elderly as they died. And then we noticed that the people making the sales pitch to us, well, it had turned out that an investment fund had contracted to manage the cemetery, and the people making the heartfelt appeals to us had driven up in luxury vehicles. So beware, beware, you know, that we don't, of course, do desperate, silly things and get taken by adventurous capitalists who are doing legal work, but they want to make a buck off us. And so we need to be cautious. But all these things sound really good. But it just seems we have such a normalcy now to Sodexo or some other vendor and partnering with them. And that didn't seem right 10 years ago. But we got here and we're okay. So I think we'll get through stuff the next couple of years, and we'll get there and we'll be okay. Thank you.
Any final comments or questions? If there are any, please make sure that they come to Mr. Brightman and or Dr. Means. This will be on our agenda for action at our meeting on the 10th. It is 10:32 p.m. We have covered an incredible amount of ground this evening.
There's one more agenda item.
Oh, yeah.
It's sitting here right underneath the rubric scores. I'm sorry.
This is ready to go.
We have a Finance and Resource Committee report. And as always, they are always wonderful, thorough, yet tight and concise.
No.
Yes, our last meeting was on May 15th. It was first meeting that Mr. Meyer was on the committee and not Dr. Worley. Much of the meeting was actually just spent on the budget book and going over the budget that we just talked about. So I will not add any more to that. We talked a little bit about the Longfellow pool and the investment that we'll need to either the decision that will have to be made regarding usage of that pool. Dr. Means sent an update to the board regarding that. So I believe we're talking about that in an upcoming meeting, or Dr. Means is going to make the decision shortly. Otherwise, we talked about creating a Fund 46, which is a resolution that will come before the board soon. Basically, it is a fund that you set up and you can put money into it that can be used for future capital improvements. But we wouldn't be able to pull from that fund for 5 years. So the thought is to pass a resolution that would start that fund soon so that if we have any extra money to put in there, we would be able to do that for capital improvements in the future. And our next meeting is next Wednesday, which is different because of Juneteenth. So I believe it's June 12th at 10 a.m.
Yes.
And that's all I have. Oh, Mr. Mayor.
May I add some about the Longfellow pool? So we are at hand with, well, I'll say the chicken's coming home to roost about the years of underspending. And, you know, we were told things about the pool by administration, and Ms. Hummer-Rowland and I looked at each other and it's like, those are pretty scary words you're using there about holes blowing in the side of the pool maybe, and what kids are in it, and what's the time frame here? And it should not be a surprise to the community if recommendations start to come forth, where the board will have to make tough decisions to start shutting some things down because we don't have the money. And this could be one. I don't know what the recommendation is going to be. Haven't talked with Dr. Means about it since that day. We talked a little bit afterwards, but this is scary stuff when you're at the end of life for something, and we need to take care of the kids in the community, and we don't want to use something longer than its useful safety time is. And so Dr. Means will take good care of us, I'm sure, but we're here. It's not tomorrow. It's now, where we're running out of money, and it's going to start to have tangible impact on services we provide, and it might not be able to wait.
I'll just note for the community that all the transactions are also on board docs, both for tonight's meeting and the previous Finance and Operations Committee meeting. That's concise enough.
It was beautiful.
Thank you.
I want to do one overarching comment. There was a comment earlier this evening around budget and kind of what the budget looks like, the situation, kind of where we stand. A lot of our conversation this evening is really about finances. What are our values? Where do we want to go? I want to thank the Finance and Operations Committee for your good work. If we go back a year ago, so it's June. It's June. At this point in June, we were not aware of what the state legislature was going to do as of yet. I think, do I recall they decided very late June?
It was late June.
So late June is when we found out that collectively the state of Wisconsin had made a choice in our legislature. We jettisoned public education off the fiscal cliff. And we set up schools across the state of Wisconsin to be some really difficult decisions, similar to what we had. So we had hoped for $1,000 over the biennium for per pupil allocation increases. That's following 2 years of $0 increases because the state legislature said, federal government's got it. We're going to divest from increasing and put that money away in a piggy bank. So we're about a year out now from when that all occurred. And I remember feeling both hopeful that the state would return to my childhood of Wisconsin, of both parties truly investing in public schools in the state. That's coming from a kid who went to a parochial school K-8. And so I am hopeful. And our legislative advocacy committee will be doing great work on really pushing, and I'm sure others around the state will as well. And I know the board will be doing work to figure out how do we make cuts that have the minimal impact that we possibly can, and how do we seek opportunities for more resources, and what do we need to ask the community to reach what is behind us, our North Star, and what the community has really demanded. And I heard it again tonight. We want to return to a place where Wauwatosa is the envy of southeastern Wisconsin. And I think our schools are really good where they are, and they aren't where we want them to collectively be. So thank you for the facilities and operations, finance and operations committee in your work on items. I agree, Mr. Meyer, we're going to have to make some difficult decisions.
Yeah, it's
but I also believe that we are going to center ourselves on what our values and priorities are. And that was one of the comments I took away from tonight. I hope folks have a restful week, and that we all are able to come in over the next 2 weeks where we have a lot of important work to do and really center ourselves around what are our priorities, what are our values, and how do we make decisions that are child-centered that will help direct us towards it. A few reminders for the community as we wrap up. On Wednesday is our third and final engagement session with the board. It's at Lincoln and starts at 6 p.m. You're able to come out and participate. We've had 2 really lively conversations a few weeks ago at Longfellow, last week at Underwood, and this week will be at Lincoln at 6 p.m. These are usually lasting about 90 minutes, and then some conversation continues a little bit later. But come for the beginning, stay till the end. The other items that we have is that next Monday, the board will be meeting. And that's our second meeting of June. And then on the 17th, we've got a special board meeting where we'll be discussing the possibility of referendum. So this is a moment in time where if you want to communicate with the board via email, it's a great opportunity to do that. Feel free to reach out, but certainly remain engaged. And we look forward to working with our community on how to move our district forward. Now, it's 10:40 p.m. May I have a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn?
May I have a second?
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoik, Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Hammer Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes, and we're adjourned. Thank you all for your time.